Welcome, everybody. I'm joined by a very special guest, the man that has just won the Disney Lorcana North American Championships. Ed, have you got any enchanted cards I could borrow, please?
No, they're on my deck.
They're on your deck.
What do you
Okay.
mean, like the new ones? Oh yeah,
You
for
got a
sure.
lot of enchanteds. How many enchanted cards did you win for your prize?
You get four play sets.
Wow.
So yeah, I think I took a picture on Twitter. Like I have them all laid out, and that took picture actually took me quite a while because it's like you gotta like lay them out all nicely,
Yeah,
and then
I
like
was impressed.
make sure it's good for the photo. You know what I mean?
So you've already won a Disney Lorcana challenge, and now you've won the North American, I should say, championships. Is it a similar feeling? Did it feel all that more sweeter to be a bigger, more prestigious event?
I would say winning the first one definitely like it's like your first time, right?
Sure.
And I feel like you can never really like replicate that. I would say. Um, I think because like I already knew I was going to Worlds anyway.
Yep.
Not to say that it doesn't mean anything to me, but it's like I feel like I was kind of just free rolling.
Sure.
So I didn't really have any kind of nervous feelings or anything. Like you can probably see when I'm on stream, like I'm just very calm and collected and just I'm just playing my game, right? And then like whatever you get is whatever you get. And I was just very fortunate that I was able to, have, decent hands and also, my opponent potentially having some, lower rolls. So I was able to get there.
So you did it playing Ruby Amethyst, which of course we actually saw you playing on my channel in the Battle of the Bay in California about a month and a half ago, right at the start of the Azure at Sea meta. And you also won that tournament playing Ruby Amethyst. But I just wanted to pull up for everybody on the video here your list that you played, and this was right at the start of set 7, of course a different tournament meta, but you've had a lot of time to practice and prepare for this tournament. You can see a few glaring differences. You've got 2 copies of Dragonfire, you've got 2 Medusas, you've got 2 Maui Half Sharks, you've got Maui, you've got Elsa, and you've got Genie, all of which you've removed. The rest of the deck has stayed and you've replaced them with other things. What is it that made you move away from this style of Ruby Amethyst, which obviously served you so well just a couple of months ago?
Yeah. So I mean that was like actually just the literally the beginning of the new
It
format,
was,
right?
yeah.
And I think everyone just kind of wanted to like try some new cards, including myself.
Hmm.
And I thought the kind of standout card in that set, or the 2 standout cards, are kind of Genie and the Maui Half Shark.
Hmm.
So if you think there's going to be a lot of Maui Half Shark, I think the natural answer to that card would be Dragonfire.
Sure.
And especially when the Ruby Sapphire can kind of turbo that card a little bit faster, it's much harder to target that card with something like Tremaine because usually they'll have something to block it, or it just won't come out at the time you need. And Dragonfire would just be a much cleaner answer to that card.
Hmm.
And it also kind of synergizes with Maui Half Shark as well, right? Like if you're able to kind of use one on 5 ink and then you play a Maui Half Shark, and in future turns you can challenge and replay the Dragonfire if needed.
Yeah, makes a ton of
And
sense.
Genie, yeah. So the Genie Elsa thing was something that was kind of on people's radars, and like the more I played it, the more I was like, if you wanted to really lean towards this, then that's the thing you have to lean on. So immediately after this tournament, I played like 4 Genie, 4 Elsa to kind of capitalize on that, the Genie Elsa war, as it were.
Yes.
So yeah, so I and also remember, you know, in the beginning of the format, I said that Genie was not really good in red purple just because of the uninkable count
Hmm.
of the deck kind of got really high. And I think once you start playing this version of the deck with Genie inside, like you end up with way more brick hands.
You have 16
And
uninkables in your Battle of the Bay list and 14 in the list that you won with at the weekend. So you've reduced the count by 2 uninkables total.
yeah, so I think the main thing though is that where the uninkable counts went actually matters a lot. So when you end up with too many like that 4 cost uninkable slot,
Yes.
you get kind of like bogged down by that, right? And I think in this particular deck, I feel like Rabbit also always got 2 cards basically, right?
Hmm.
So if you're always just playing Rabbit, then you're basically always kind of unclogging yourself. But if you have both Rabbit and Genie in your hand, then you're gonna get like kind of clogged, right? Like it's like, oh, it's turn 4. I actually need to play this Genie to go for the Genie Elsa War, and then now I'm stuck with this Rabbit that I really can't play at any good time, right?
Interesting.
So basically, what I thought was like, I'm just gonna try to play Rabbit at all times, And when you do that, you realize that your hand is always kind of live and you always have ink available because like worst case, your rabbit gets banished and then you can get another card and that card is usually the ink. Versus Genie, if it gets banished, then that's it, right? You
Yes.
didn't
Yeah.
really get anything back from it. So I think that's something I kind of missed from earlier versions of Ruby Amethyst. That like you never really got any brick hands, and you always had more gas to kind of keep it moving.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, we saw you in the final. I've never seen a man with so many cards in his hand so consistently. You were just bouncing these rabbits, you were cycling them, and it was almost just like going back in time watching the style of play of your Ruby Amethyst deck. I think when I was watching it, I sort of referred to your version of Ruby Amethyst as it's Ruby Amethyst Control. It's a classic control deck, whereas a lot of the Ruby Amethyst decks we've been seeing more recently are sort of more mid-rangey, right? They've still got the Be Prepareds, but they're looking to kind of run away with things a little bit more. But you just went really, really methodical, really so valued your card draw. And you went for 4 Lady Tremaines as well, and no copies of Madame Medusa. Can you talk to us about that as well? Shout out to Card Market who sponsored this video. Lady Tremaine, after Ed's win, is now the 6th best-selling card.
Yeah. Okay. So Medusa mostly for Diablo and Beast, but I think Emerald Steel has kind of fallen off of meta a little bit because of Ruby Sapphire in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my kind of thought was that Ruby Sapphire was going to be more popular, and Tremaine's really good against that deck, right?
Yes.
So I basically removed all of them, and I think, like you said, the more copies of Tremaine you have, the better they get because you can like shift on them, and like post Be Prepared is also very powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like my kind of thought process, and it's definitely like weaker, I would say, on the draw
Okay.
because usually Medusa lets you kind of pick the card that you need to remove
Right.
when you have 6. But if you can't do that, then it's much weaker. So you kind of have to survive until B prep,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that, if you can survive, Tremaine gets significantly better. And I think the Sisu also helps a lot because post B prep, if they play like a lot of small characters, you can remove them with the Sisu,
Mm-hmm.
and then do your Tremaine thing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you've got that legendary Sisu in. Of course, that was what you sort of popularized back after your Lorcana Challenge win. Was there ever a world where you considered not playing the legendary Sisu? Of course, previously it was a card which really helped you in the Emerald Steel meta to give you a fighting chance against Emerald Steel, but was it always going to be in the deck, or did you have to consider whether it was worth it? Did you ever consider playing 1 copy, for example?
Yeah. So I think the thing about the Sisu is that it gives another kind of pronged attack, especially in like an open deck list. So I think you probably like saw in the final games where my opponent tried to play like Tipo or like Hiram, those type of things that kind of block the Tremaine, right?
Yes.
So you kind of needed some additional things to kind of remove those like small characters
Mm-hmm.
for your Tremaine to kind of go through. And I think one of the mistakes I see like some players do against this that I don't really blame them for because it's not very intuitive is that they don't try to like play those cards at the on the same turn. So for example, like if you're trying to protect the Tamatoa, you have to like play it with the Tipo on the same turn. Like
Right.
I see some people kind of running out those Tipos it's like kind of randomly, and
Mm-hmm.
then you just get like Sisu'd, and
Okay,
then now it's
interesting.
like well, I have nothing to protect, right? And I think eventually in the finals, my opponent actually figured that out
Mm-hmm.
because I think before he was running out the T-pose for fun,
Yep.
and then it gets like blown up by the Sisu, and it's like, okay, wait a minute, I
Yep.
actually can't do that. So I should wait until I can play them both simultaneously to try to
Very
choke me
interesting.
out of the game. But the other downside of that is that it's not a downside, but like you'll still play into the B prep, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you see how like basically no matter what, I have the answer to whatever you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the whole point of this deck. Like that's why I like drawing so many cards. Like I know some people are like, well, I won the game with like 10 cards in my hand and they're wasted. But if you really think about it, it doesn't really matter, right? You won the game. Why do you care how many cards you have in your hand,
Mm.
right? So I think the thing is, as long as you're able to find the answer, your opponent will eventually run out of things to hit you with, right? So like you said, like I realize I like playing this deck as like a control strategy.
Yep.
Um, I think people will probably ask like, why are you playing Flynn then, right? Isn't Flynn like an aggressive card?
Yeah.
I think playing an early Flynn is so powerful, especially when you're on the play against like Ruby Sapphire. basically gives you a ton of non-games.
Hmm.
So you just take all the free wins that you can collect on the play, on the draw, then you have to go with your like B prep, your main kind of control line. So if you think about it, it's I remember I was like talking to Reese a little bit, right? Like
Hmm.
his strategy, right? Where it was like he was trying to do the Flynn Sisu thing on the play,
Yep.
and then maybe on the draw you go for the sail and then control strategy,
Yeah,
right?
because he was playing
So
Ruby Sapphire with the Flynn and Sisu, who's the top seed in Europe.
so this is like kind of the same thing, I would say, like how I think about it. Like when I'm on the play, I get to do my Chernobog, Flynn Sisu, Rabbit, thing. Like I'm just going full gas, right?
Hmm.
And then when I'm on the draw, I'm trying to do like, a bunch of one costs and then Sisu or like a crab and then, rabbit, brawl, etc. Just play like a control strategy, try to, keep you from, gaining lore, right? Because I mean that's why like being on the play is so powerful. You get to, you know, do your proactive plan and gain a bunch of lore quest first, and your opponent has to deal with it.
Hmm.
So I still wanted my proactive strategy to be strong. So I had to add some like crabs and stuff to kind of go on the other side. So you can't just play like zero reactive cards,
Hmm.
like zero crab, especially in this version with like so many one costs. Because I remember when you first had me on, right? It's like, oh, you play Cusco but no crab, right? But
Hmm.
it's like, yeah, well, we probably should add the crab back just because we have so many one costs that you can utilize, and the meta has definitely shifted to be way more aggressive.
Hmm.
And if you don't have any crabs, you're gonna have a pretty tough time. And I think that's another reason why I cut Maui in particular and Elsa,
Hmm.
because by the time you get there, like your opponent can just run away with the game, right? Like especially these like dock based decks
Yep.
where they go like one drop and then two and then like another 2+1 and then dock and then like dump their whole hand. And it's like, well, by the time I play Maui or Elsa, like I'm already dead. So I think Crab helps a little bit in terms of trying to stabilize those type of spots.
Hmm.
Obviously, if they have the super high roll, you probably just lose anyway.
Sure.
But I think Crab will at least give you a fighting chance against those kind of medium style rolls.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the crab in many ways is almost like a sixth fox when you're going second. It's just like a consistent turn three way of controlling the
Mhm.
board. Of course, the last thing we've not talked about, and perhaps most interesting of all, is not the Queen's Castle, but it's the library and 4 copies of it to boot as well. And you mentioned in the interview you had afterwards this was a last minute idea that you had, and it was based off watching the LCQ. So for those that don't know, of course, at Disneyland on the Friday, and this was both in Paris and in California. The Friday was a bunch of people on like last chance qualifiers, and then the Saturday and the Sunday was the main event. Ed was already qualified, so you had the luxury on the Friday. You didn't go to Disneyland, and you watched Lorcana, Ed. Well, I guess it paid off because this library was an idea you got from watching the last chance qualifiers, right, at the very last moment.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Disneyland on Thursday, so
Okay,
it was
fair
fine
enough.
already.
I'll allow that then.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. But yeah, library. So I think something I kind of thought back on like my entire time playing Lorcana is like, what was it's like ever since the inception of Queen's Castle, like
Hmm.
I always really didn't like Queen's Castle. And I think the reason why was because it never guaranteed a card.
Right.
Sometimes you run it out and then it's instantly removed, you lost a card.
Hmm.
Or sometimes you attach your characters to it and then they get blown up. You also didn't get a card.
Okay.
So I think those were two major downfalls of Queen's Castle. And even I remember I was playing against like DKP back in Dallas, and I did the triple the Queen's Castle thing. I
Yes.
was like that. I feel like that wasn't even that good. Like okay, and that's why it looked pretty good,
It
right?
looked very
The
good.
problem was like it looked really good, but it's like if I just had like library instead, I didn't need to just clog up my hand with a bunch of like nothing cards until I had like enough ink to deploy everything.
Hmm.
So what I really liked about library was that you can kind of deploy it at any time in the game, get your guaranteed value, and exert kind of like a two-pronged attack on your opponent. For example, like, if your opponent ever exerts anything and you have something that can challenge it, they have to be really scared of like, if I just play library, attach, and ram it into you, right?
Hmm.
Like, especially the other reason why I like all these one costs, especially Diablo in like a library deck, it kind of reminds me of like Cusco, right? It's exactly Cusco but a one cost.
Yeah, which is a big
And you
deal.
can always yeah, it's a huge deal. Like actually, it's 50% less, right?
Hmm. I
So
was about to say the same thing. Yeah, exactly right.
so I think the upside of playing all these one costs like is because anytime I have any one cost on the board is very, very threatening, right? What if I just play library, attach, and then I draw 2 cards? Like that's such a huge swing. Like
Hmm.
paying it's basically like, you pay 1 or 2 to draw like 2 cards.
Yep.
And I thought that combo was so powerful that I included like all the 1 cost,
Hmm.
right, in order to try to do this kind of thing as much as possible. And I think it really did pay off in terms of, you always get to your next card. So that's why it's like very easy for me to deploy so many libraries at once. Because like the first library actually gets you to like the second library, right? Because it can get
Interesting.
you like a rabbit or a bounce, and then that will eventually draw you more libraries. And then eventually, your opponent's gonna run out of juice, and then you just play a bunch of libraries, and then they lose the game, right?
I mean, the other nice thing about having 12 1-cost characters as well is Ruby Amethyst, if you miss that 1-drop and you don't find a Flynn Rider, there's going to be some of those games where, of course, you can't play a snake on an empty board, and you're going to be able to potentially take a turn 2 of either snake or even the double 1-drop. Did you find yourself doing that very often? If you miss Flynn, you go for the Shin Miri line, as I like to call it, with a couple of magic brooms, for example, on turn 2?
Yeah, that actually happens like very often, I would say. Especially when you're on the draw. Sometimes I even ink Flynn on the draw to play like, the triple ones,
Yeah,
right?
I'm
Like
not surprised. Yeah, it
I
makes
would say,
sense.
yeah. And especially like if they like survive and like for example like Diablo, like if you just run out like I think against Sailor in the top 8 match. Yeah, against Sailor I had the triple ones, right?
Hmm.
And even though I didn't have the Flynn, and I think actually like on the draw, the Flynn is actually not that strong because it's way easier to block it, right? For example, they do like turn 3 Grammatala,
Yes.
and then afterwards, you play your Sisu, and then they can play Maui, and you're basically stuck. You don't get any lore from it.
And the Flynn Rider's
So I
also
think,
not drawing you a card, whereas these 1-drops replace themselves, right?
yeah. So another thing is like Diablo specifically, I really like, especially early game, because like when you quest with it, they have to actually challenge it. So
Yep.
when they challenge it, they're actually not doing anything with that character in particular.
Hmm.
So for example, like if you go Grandma Tala, well, do you want to use your grandma to like sing how far I'll go, or do you want it to use to challenge this Diablo,
Hmm.
right? So usually you put him in also an awkward spot where it's like, well, if I don't charge this Diablo, then he might play library, attach it, and then draw multiple cards, and that would be really bad for me, right? So I think Diablo is quite annoying for that reason, and I really like playing them, especially like early game. And then late game, they're also free, right? You can just play it, and then if you remove it, that's fine. Like I draw the card, and I just continue my kind of control, like draw as many cards as possible game plan.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting about the library in the Queen's Castle is interestingly when I was in Seattle with Moyen prepping for Seattle, I was testing a lot of Amethyst Steel, and I was playing the library in that deck. And at one point we switched it out for the Queen's Castle, and it felt like such a better fit because my deck was very aggressive, the Queen's Castle with that 2 lore per turn, whereas the library felt really quite slow and like it wasn't winning me many games. But I suppose with your deck being that much more methodical, really relying on the card draw and the B preps, the library suits the control style more than a Queen's Castle does. The Queen's Castle really applies pressure in terms of lore, but that library has the extra willpower, it costs less, and as you're mentioning, it can give you some guaranteed draw. You can play it, and draw instantly from it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the R&B game, I think there was a game where it's like I had like 2 characters on board, and I was able to like attach them both to the library quest, and then B prep myself, and then like one of the cards was like a rabbit or something, so I got to draw 3 cards,
Wow.
and a lot of decks cannot recover from that, right?
Yep.
Because at that point, I still have a library that you have to deal with while you have no characters, and I just drew 3 cards, probably like some Tremaines, some B preps, just basically whatever you're playing, it's gonna get removed, and I get to continue the cycle, right? I probably draw more libraries, draw more like small characters I can put in the library. So it kind of like the upside of drawing cards is that usually it gives you like a ton of options to draw more cards, and those cards turn into removal or more lore. So like if you see in my finals, like I basically always had goat bounce no matter what, right?
Hmm.
It's like why is that? It's because I basically drew my whole deck, and like I can assemble that anytime that I need to.
Yeah, and those 1-drops are also helping you do that as well, with these cards being thinning cards, right? If you're drawing, you're thinning your deck. If you play a broom and you draw with it instantly, you get a lore, and then you've kind of got 1 card less in deck. That's how I've always liked to look at it. It's interesting that as soon as I saw your deck, I just like it just spoke to me. I had a really good feeling about it, but you definitely had some interesting matchups in your top 16. We saw you take down Ruby Sapphire. We saw you take down Zan's Emerald Steel. And in your semi-final match, I think was there a moment of panic in game number 3 when Zan played Diablo on turn 1, but did not eventually shift? Were you worried for a moment?
Okay, so that was actually a really funny story because I noticed like when people play a Diablo, you can tell whether or not they have the shift based on where they put the ink, right? So I remember like
What?
Zan
Wait,
put
sorry,
like
pardon?
yeah, no,
That's a new one for
no,
me.
that's not what I think it's more like okay, so like on their second turn, right after they have the Diablo,
Uh-huh.
so you can kind of tell like whether or not they're gonna shift it based on where they put like the card that they're gonna quote unquote either discard for Diablo or use as their ink. So I
Huh.
noticed his hand was like closer to the ink pile and not the discard pile. So I was like, oh, he doesn't have the shift because he's thinking about just like inking the card and then playing
Huh.
like
What? That's so interesting.
like yeah,
Is it
maybe
this
you
moment here
can
you're
like play
talking
it through
about?
and
Like
then
when
see
he's...
where he decides to
Oh,
like
wait.
put the card, right? You see where his hand is?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, well, I guess you can't really see it as well from this angle, but I can see he was like, I'm gonna drop this card into my inkwell, and then that's when he doesn't have the shift. So
Huh.
like after I saw where his hand placement was, I felt like much better that I wasn't gonna get shifted on.
Amazing. And we only saw, as the viewers, we saw the third and final game, which was Zan going first, but you were the high C, which meant he was able to take you down on the draw at some point. Did he shift Diablo in the first 2 games, or was it just in one of them, if you remember?
Um, okay, that's kind of unfortunate. I actually don't really remember,
Sure, no
but I'm pretty
problem.
sure. I think the game I lost, he just had too much discard, and that's kind of the weakness of this deck, right?
Hmm.
Like if he's able to discard you, you actually can't really do anything. It seems like I can draw a lot of cards. That's actually not the case, especially if you start throwing away my like main engine pieces, and it actually doesn't snowball in itself. So he basically like kind of nipped it at the bud, and I just wasn't able to get there.
Yeah, and then
But in
there's...
this game, yeah, if you actually like stop right here, like in the
Sure.
first 3 turns, I would say Emerald Steel's most important 3 turns are the first 3 turns,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like if you have Diablo Shift or like you have a turn 3 Prince John, oh man, those games are almost impossible to win, I would say. Like turn 3 Prince John or Shift Diablo or both. If you have both, you just win the game. I'm just gonna scoop it up, right? But very fortunate in this scenario, it's probably the best case for me. Like he had Diablo, Calhoun, and Pete. If you had to do turn 3 Pete, your hand like must be really, really bad.
Unless you've
So I
shifted
know,
Diablo, but he hadn't in this case, right?
yeah, so he didn't have it, and I was like, wow, like I actually have a real like fighting chance in this game. When I saw that, I was like, okay, maybe that we can actually play the game, right? Um, he did have like the storm for the
Hmm.
Flynn, which I mean, it's like it's bad for me, but it's not like backbreaking to the point where I can't play the game because like the Sisu can still remove the Pete, or like I eventually actually played Crab on this Diablo, and now I'm really fighting for board, right? Because I think some of the newer iterations of Emerald Steel, like the one that Zan's piloting, are really kind of board focused,
Hmm.
with the combo with like Curse Merfolk, and then if you challenge it, you just get hit by the Calhoun. So it's like they have a better defense, early game defense, and a little bit more like questing power, but you kind of trade off like Beast, for example, right? Like
Yep.
not having that kind of mid range grind strategy. So once you run out of juice in this deck, like if you don't get Shift Diablo, you actually run out of cards very quickly.
Yeah, we see the
So
crab putting in a lot of work there when you're going second, combining with that Diablo, right? Taking down a threat, giving you some board control. And you talked to me earlier about how if you can survive those first few turns, you kind of just manage to get your way out of it. And the longer the game goes on, the more in your favor it goes. And you just end up with a massive board, a bunch of cards in hand. And it did end up, I wouldn't say being a comfortable game, but I think it's like you say that those first few turns in Emerald Steel, often you can know if you're playing against Emerald Steel, if you're in a winning or losing position. But if we go into the finals, you're going second as you are the lowest seed, despite being the 5th seed, which can't feel too fortuitous. What are you thinking, as obviously it's open deck list, what are you thinking about your mulligan here? You're just staring down your opponent, I noticed. You're not even, okay, maybe that was not quite
yeah.
the right
I mean,
moment, but when you were mulliganing, you weren't actually, you waited for your opponent to see what they were doing first. Is that something you always try and do when you're going second? Just look at what your opponent's doing, try and track what cards and get an idea. Is that the level you're going to, or are you just relaxing at that point?
Yeah, so there are like little things you can kind of pick up by not looking at your own cards, right? It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the poker analogy where it's like you don't look at your cards until it's your turn.
Mm.
So, I mean, what kind of additional information is there if I look at my hand, right? Absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the main thing I kind of look for is like what cards they're keeping and how they're kind of arranging their cards, right? So, like, you can kind of tell sometimes where they're like, okay, I keep like one card or two cards in like Ruby Sapphire. Oh, maybe this is like a popsicle and like a ramp spell, right?
Yeah, look
Or
at there
like
you are. You're not even looking at your cards yet. You're just staring at your opponent. I love it.
yeah. So it's kind of like if they end up mulliganing a lot of cards, then it's like you can probably keep a more medium roll and like you probably be okay. But for example, let's say they keep all seven and it's like, oh, they have the nuts, then you might have to be a little bit more aggressive if your hand can't deal with the nuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like little things you can do to get like a mild edge. I'm not telling you that's like, oh, this is gonna be
Yeah.
what makes you like the greatest player, but I think a lot of these kind of small things you can do to kind of pay attention to how your opponent plays the game, what they start saying to you, really does impact your win rate, I would say.
So you're going second. This is a matchup you feel quite confident on. What's your overall game plan here, going up against Ruby Sapphire?
Yeah, so I basically built this deck in mind, right, with being able to beat Ruby Sapphire. And I think historically everyone wants to try to go under uh
Mm-hmm.
Ruby Sapphire to just like race and stuff.
Yep.
I decided that I wanted to try to go over and try to control the board more than they can and draw more cards than they can. Because specifically Rabbit, if you are able to bounce it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
it's never in danger, right? A Hiram is you always get brawled in this matchup.
Yes.
So
Yes.
something I look for in particular is I always have brawl. If you watch this entire final, I basically never let his Hiram quest, not
Yep.
even a single time, because of the power of drawing two more cards in that matchup could mean that you lose the game. But he can't stop me from bouncing my rabbit, right? My rabbit will always be protected in my hand. So basically, I can, draw like multiple cards like every single turn. And because I get to draw multiple cards, I'll always have that answer for Hiram. So that's why it always seems like I have the answer for Hiram. It's because I do, because I'm drawing so many cards. And there's a purpose for me drawing these cards, right? It's not like just I'm going to hold on to them for no reason. I'm looking for particular answers to the things that he presents to me. So the early game, I think how it works is like, I'm definitely still like the aggressor, right? I'm deploying as many characters as possible, and
Mm-hmm.
he's trying to set up, and I'm just going sideways, right? And then what eventually happens is, he's gonna play like a B prep or a Sisu, and then that's when I start playing my control game, right?
Right.
So he plays like a Sisu, and then I can play like a Tremaine, and then he plays his thing, and then eventually, we trade back and forth. But usually I'll get like the better exchange, just because all my cards actually can kind of replace themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and
And there's that
eventually
brawl
I'll
on the
I'll
Flavisham that we talked about. And if you didn't do that, then this popsicle was getting banished and he was drawing two more cards. And I think that's a huge strength of Ruby. I was doing a thought experiment, right? If you could play 56 Amethyst cards in the current metagame, and you could just pick one other card to pair that with in the whole game, what would it be? And I think it's Brawl after this final.
Yeah, I mean, if, for example, for some reason Steel got like a card that can just like remove Hiram, like, oh, pay four and deal
Because,
six,
of course,
right,
Zeus
for
doesn't quite
example,
right. Zeus is one off.
it's very close, right? But if I think the game might be quite different if they ever release like an action that's like, four cost deal six.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would say that Steel probably becomes the best color in the game because I think the problem is like there's no easy answer to Hiram, and that's why Emerald Steel struggles so much because that Hiram really runs away with the game,
Yep.
and there's nothing you can do about it, right? I mean, there are some temporary solutions like Heffalumps or whatever, but it's not. Eventually they'll get to draw the cards, and you're going to be in real trouble. So that's why I think Ruby is still very powerful. Like being able to play B prep, remain brawl, like just very unconditional, like fairly unconditional removals, is very strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we saw the B prep come through from Scott, but you've already got a nice early lead despite being the player going second, thanks to that Amethyst package. And this is where we start just seeing your rabbit bouncing back and forth. Of course, Scott's hand lower than it would be if it wasn't for Hiram. If you hadn't removed that first Hiram, that's two extra cards in hand. That means he might draw another Hiram, he might draw more items, and it can get out of control. Whereas you're just bouncing this rabbit back and forth, and it's giving you more rabbits and more friends.
Yeah, so you see, I already have like two brawls in my hand, right? So it's like I'm never inking those. I'm waiting for like the Hirams to pop them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something interesting to know is like once I get the copy of Sisu though, you can potentially be a little bit more liberal with with your brawls because you'll just have additional answers, right? So
Okay.
you kind of have to keep track of how many Hirams your opponent played,
Hmm.
and then you can kind of just match the same amount of brawls to their Hirams, or like big Sisus to their Hirams, right? Because those are kind of just the main targets. But once you
We see here the Diablo comes down. You could have moved the fox into the library, but you're still looking to just develop as many characters as possible.
Yeah, so I mean, playing this card is basically, quote unquote free, right? If
Hmm.
it removes it, that's fine. If it doesn't remove it, you get one lore is actually huge.
Yep.
Like if you look at my board, if you don't do anything against this, I'm getting 3 lore, right?
Yes.
And that's like, I'm at 10 already. I can get to 13, and then basically once I get to 17, the game's over, right?
Hmm.
I can do the goat bounce goat. I'll always have 10 or 11 ink to do that play. So basically, my goal every game is, how do I get to like 17, right? And
Hmm.
every little like chip damage I get is just one card closer I get to winning the game. So yeah, here you obviously see I have another brawl,
Of course you
and
do.
then like if you, of course I do, right? Yeah, and that's how the deck is like kind of set up, right? Like of course I always have it, right? So now I'm
In
presenting
terms
like,
of your mulligan as well, because it's not always easy to track these. So you're keeping brawl.
Mhm.
If you have like 2 brawls in your opening hand, is that something you would keep, or would you maybe mulligan one? Because you would never really want to ink a brawl in this deck, would you?
Yeah, it's not
Not in this
preferred. So
matchup,
I
anyway.
think one brawl, yeah, one brawl is probably good enough. Like you'll probably draw the second brawl eventually.
Hmm.
So I think one brawl is a good amount to keep, and you're mostly just looking for your early, Flynn Sisu type game plan, right? And rabbit, bounce your rabbit. So you still need some amount of, inkables, and once you get those, like the rest of your deck will just kind of chain together. So early game, I'm still looking for like the, quote unquote aggro strategy.
Hmm.
But
Which,
after you get that aggro strategy out of the way, you can start playing your value engine.
I mean, also
So
just
here,
having this much of a lead as well, it puts your opponent in a position where they really have to remove everything you're putting down, and it means they can't play too greedily either, right?
yeah, and like here, right, with the Diablo, like with the setup with the library, like drawing 2 cards is just crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's such a good value engine, and drawing into stuff like Tremaine, like it removes a character and it presents a two lore threat, right? You don't remove my Tremaine, oh, I'm gonna get 2 lore, you're about to lose, right?
Yep.
And then because you're using your ink to remove my Tremaine, my library is just taking up. So I think this game specifically is a very good example of why like library plus Tremaine plus B prep works so well together,
Hmm.
because it's such like a multi-pronged attack, right?
Yep.
You remove my Tremaine, okay, my library's gonna take up. You remove my library, then my Tremaine's gonna quest. So you can't deal with everything, right? And every turn my library is just like ticking up slowly, and you'll never be able to remove it, right? Because I'm just removing your characters every turn with B prep, Tremaine, Sisus, etc.
Scott's played 3 dragons in the last turn, the Maleficent and then 2 big Sisus. Most decks would crumble at this. Meanwhile, you've got
Mhm.
about 10 cards still in hand, and you just Tremaine him again. It's
Yeah, and then there's
absolutely
nothing you can do
brutal.
about it, right? You can see he's just like, yeah, I'm just cooked. Like, I'm super dead here. As
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, like I can't do anything about it, right? Like I have no answers to this multi-pronged attack, and like that's just kind of how Ruby Sapphire is built. Like
B
the
prep and
main
you draw
downside,
2 from that, and you've got the goat and the snake in
yeah.
hand. Just
I remember I
brilliant.
was watching your broadcast. It's like, oh yeah, you should draw your card and you balance, then you bounce it. But actually, so what happened in the conversation was basically he was saying like, oh, do you have goat bounce? And I was like, yeah. And he
Yeah.
was like, okay, yeah, I'll scoop it up, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's not like yeah, like it's like a little sloppy, but it's like, it's kind of like the mental, like when you're playing at that level, it's like, you already know what's coming, and then if you
Yeah.
have it, like don't waste, right? Like
Sure.
let's just go next. So I think that was kind of the thought process behind that.
So, game 2, I wasn't planning on watching because we're watching at 2 times speed. We might be able to sneak it in. This is actually the one in the final that you lost. You ended up winning 3-1. It was a best of 5. So it's going to be quite
Mhm.
interesting to see what exactly went wrong for you and what went well for Scott in this one. Of course, you went first only once in out of the
Mhm.
4 games, and
Yeah.
you won the time you went first. But this is the one game Scott did manage to get off you. What do you think went in Scott's favor in this game too?
Okay, so this one, I think basically what happened was he went very wide in the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he just had a ton of characters, and it forced me to play B prep.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what, my game plan when I'm on the draw is to try to play B prep, clean everything up, right? And basically on the following turn, what happens is like if you only play one character and I play Tremaine, then that's the game that I win, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if he goes wide again and I don't have the second B prep, I'm gonna lose the game. So basically what happened this game was I only had one B prep, and then I couldn't it couldn't like wipe the second wave of his characters.
Hmm.
And yeah, that summed up this game basically.
You see, you
Like, you
banished the
can watch
magic
it through.
broom on the previous turn. Was that just to look for something? Your hand's pretty uninkable. You got 2 Tremaines. Was that just to look for something a little bit more inkable that you are more happy putting into your inkwell? Because the Tipo is
Yeah,
not
I mean
threatening to
that's
remove the broom in that spot, right?
yeah. So that's the other thing about my hand. Like, if your hand it becomes like too heavy on inkables, you can't just like leave your characters on the board because you might end up in a spot where like you actually can't play the game.
Hmm.
So in these kind of spots, you kind of have to be a little bit more conservative and just like banish your 1 cost and cycle them through to the point where it's like you can play like a functional hand. And like you can see my hand is actually quite bricked here. Like I actually didn't really have a good turn 3 play.
Yep.
If you played specifically Hiram on 3, my hand would actually even be better, right? Because I can just brawl on 3.
Right.
But I was like, I remember I was like, oh my god, please play Hiram on 3 and not Grandma. And
Not
then when
many
you play
get,
Grandma, I was like, oh, I am
not many
so
decks
dead.
can
Because
say that, can they? Please play hero.
yeah, yeah, I was like, please play Hiram on 3 and not Grandma, right? Because now like my turn 3 basically is nothing, right? Like I can't play Brawl because he doesn't have anything for me to brawl. So I'm basically stuck here where like I can't develop a board because like yeah I drew another brawl, right? That's why you don't keep like the multiple brawls.
Hmm.
And like I was just stuck on so many brawls, like unplayable hand early game.
Do you think
So I think
something went wrong with your mulligan? Do you think it's just the luck of the draw on that one?
oh no, that was just the luck of the draw, right?
Hmm.
Like you mulligan for the thing, right? Like the multiple 1 cost
Yep.
Sisu, you find a brawl for the Hiram, you keep your rabbit, etc. Right? And then sometimes like you don't draw those like kind of early game pieces that you need. For example, in this game, drew multiple brawls, drew like the Tremaine multiples, and you kind of just get stuck, right? Of course, these games definitely can happen, and it's like if your opponent puts a lot of pressure on you, specifically here. If you look here,
This
after he
play is
shifts, like
crazy from Scott, can I just say? When he did this,
yeah,
I was watching with
mhm,
Moyen, who obviously plays a lot of Ruby Sapphire. I don't. I was like, okay, so he's obviously just going to ink the sail, play the Tamatoa. Like, why would he not do that? But he doesn't. And obviously it works out for him because this is the only game he ends up winning.
mhm. Oh, I was gonna say this is actually very obvious to shift the Sisu, because
Hmm.
if you look at how much ink I have, I only have like what 5 ink, right? Something like that.
Hmm.
And there's basically I can't play B prep until like 2 turns later. So he's gonna get huge lower value from this, and like there's just no way for me to stop it, right?
Right.
So like, I think it was very heads up for him to like realize that okay, actually this is a very good window for me to just blow up my opponent's board and just go sideways. And he
Mhm.
was able to go sideways twice, right? With especially like this entire board and like a big Sisu that quest for 3. So I thought that was really like smart of him to kind of recognize that I'm actually the beatdown, which
Yep.
is actually really fun. Like Ruby Sapphire being the beatdown,
Hmm.
like that's just
Like,
what
look
it
at
is,
that
right? And I
inking
think
Flavishant Tamatoa, shifting Sisu. I couldn't believe my eyes, but then he just turns everything sideways. But you're not too far away from the be prepared, are you, at this point? But Scott
yeah,
just finds that little 1 turn window, right?
yeah, basically like anything I play here doesn't actually really matter, right? So that's why I'm just like, well, play friends, and I'm just gonna be prep, and he already knew that, so he can just pass. I'm gonna be prep, and then it's just a matter of him, getting the rest of the way there. So remember how earlier I said like I needed multiple B preps if he decides to go a little bit wider.
Hmm.
So he decided to just dump his hand, and it's just like, well, if you have B prep, you have B prep,
He
right?
uses the Maui as a
But
blocker from Tremaine potentially there as well, right?
yeah, so I think in this spot, yeah, obviously you have to brawl to hear him, like I said before. But this Maui actually like was extremely annoying, right?
Hmm.
So here he played the Tamatoa, and it's like, well, what can I do here? If I don't have specifically B prep the second copy, I'm gonna lose the game, right? So you see how like this like Maui specifically kind of saved him. Like if he didn't have this Maui, I basically Tremaine him here,
Hmm.
and then he loses the game, right?
The stream died here,
So
so we went on to another one, but I've got that up here.
mhm. Yeah, so like I couldn't remove this Tamatoa, and basically when Ruby Sapphire gets to untap with Tamatoa, they win the game. So basically after I saw that I had no B prep and he had that Maui blocker,
Hmm.
I already recognized I lost the game here.
Yeah, you can see your facial expression kind of justifying that. So, yeah, Scott runs away with that one. Let's move on to the final 2 games, which, of course, you were more successful on. We're going to
Mhm.
see you go first. The only time we see you go first in the final. starting off with a Chernobog's followers, and I guess you're just looking for that Flynn Rider on turn 2, right? And you find it.
Oh yeah, so something interesting here that I probably should have thought about before I inked this Chernobog and played this Flynn was so something very specific about open deck list is that he has Queen. I knew he had one copy of Queen of Hearts.
Yeah.
And what he said was really funny. He was like, "Oh man, how come you're so smart?" And then he showed me the Queen of Hearts because he was like, about to challenge my, ice block and challenge my Chernobog, right, and get that free value. So I think something that is like a little small thing is like an open deck list. If you know they have to punish, you probably should respect it, even though it's like one copy, because it's so devastating if he's able to do that to you, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I decided to pop it. And I know one of the memes that I kind of do is like, oh, you should definitely not sing your Sisu if you can help it, right? Because you want to quest for 2. But my hand was actually kind of like I can't ink any of those cards, right? Like I remember I was talking about like the quote unquote secret uninkables, right? Like the bounce cards and like all against like Hiram. Those things are not inkable, right? So I would rather kind of trade off some of my lore in order to make my hand a little bit more malleable to whatever my opponent plays. So I decided to sing Friends because like I definitely could not ink any of those cards. Highly illegal to do so. I decided to sing Friends there. So I mean sometimes that's something you have to do, right?
Yeah, of course, Sisu questing for 2, so often it would be more efficient to quest with something, even if it costs 4, like a rabbit or a goat, and get that extra lore with Sisu. But what you're saying is you value the brawls, you value these other cards so much that you basically value them as uninkables, and that impacts your decision.
Yeah, so this hand is also a little bit unfortunate because I didn't have rabbit, and that's kind of the downside if you're playing only rabbit as your draw engine. Sometimes you don't draw it, right?
Yep.
And in that spot, I just had to ink something. So one of the options was actually to ink this Diablo, but I thought that I might have needed it to like potentially combo with like Crab to take out this Maui, or just get overall value, and eventually I'll just get another card, and I need to keep the pressure on him, right? So I decided to like play the Diablo out and ink the Fox, and just try to get the lore for now.
Are you worried at all at this point, because you've only got 5 lore on the score, and Scott's got significantly more ink than you, despite being the player going first? Or are you feeling pretty comfortable at this stage?
Oh, I mean, here if he only has one card, right, with a Maui and 2 ice blocks. So this is the problem with ice block that I like. When I practiced Ruby Sapphire for basically a month, I didn't play the ice block version because of this reason specifically. So ice block actually costs a card, right?
Yes.
And then when you play ice block, you basically have no more cards. Look at him; he has like 0 cards in hand with a Sisu, right? I just have like 1 Tremaine. Don't you just lose the game? Like you're just like top decking, and like you're gonna get grinded out by
the rabbit.
The Ruby. Yeah, so I was like, oh yeah, here we go. Like I drew the rabbit. Let's start like playing the game, right? Basically, once I draw a rabbit, the game's already over. And I know that's like kind of facetious, but like I think that's basically the case, right? Like this rabbit just draws way too many cards, and like it's very very hard to keep up with the rabbit. And like in this spot, like if he didn't have a removal for this library, it was actually quite dangerous for him to even like quest here, right? I could potentially have like, oh yeah, I remember the feed got cut out in the feature room.
It wasn't ideal, but it happens.
So so basically what happened was like I played a Tremaine to remove that Sisu, and then he played a Shark, and then now I'm in this spot, right? He challenged the library with the Sisu. So basically
shows
that's
you the
what
power
happened
of the library, right? Like
yeah, he had to, and it still wasn't removed, right?
Yeah.
So in this spot, I basically present to him like, okay, do you want to remove? Okay, I remember you talked about this too, like, and I think you guys are probably right. Like, I probably should just bounce the rabbit that I just played and just leave the rabbit in the library for him to challenge, because I already have 2 copies of rabbit, right? It doesn't matter. You kill one of them, it's fine. So like, yeah, looking back, you guys were right. Like, I should definitely just bounce someone that was not.
I actually didn't have an opinion. I asked him. It was an interesting.
Oh, yeah, he's right.
I didn't have an opinion.
Yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. So I mean, that was kind of the inexperience, I think, of like I've never played this card before. So I kind of had to use my intuition, and my intuition was just not correct in that spot. But I think it didn't matter because he ended up challenging the library anyway.
Why would you see this sort of game play out? Because you're in a really good spot. After the tournament then, do you think there's any changes you would make to the deck? And also on that point, do you think that this is a deck that could perform as well at a locals? Or do you think it was just because, of course, at this event there was so many Ruby Sapphire players that it performed so well? Or do you think it's actually got some legs to do it? well elsewhere. So firstly, like, would you change any other cards?
Looking back, I mean, if I had to play this tournament again, I would play the same 60.
Hmm.
Because of like the prominence of Ruby Sapphire, right?
Yep.
If my locals was a ton of Ruby Sapphire, I would also play this deck.
Hmm.
But if your locals was like a ton of like Amber Steel or like Pro Amethyst, I would definitely not play this deck because like you said, we don't have any answers to the real problem cards in those decks. Versus like if you really think about it fundamentally, like Tremaine's really good at removing like large characters, right? And that's what she does well. And then Medusa's really good at removing small characters because she can kind of pick and choose the ones that are important that you need to remove. So I think the other thing, like the very obvious ones, are like no Genie, no Elsa, or
Hmm.
and no Maui, right? So those are kind of those like mid game kind of beefy characters that help you get through to the mid game. But I mean, against Ruby Sapphire, like the mid game actually doesn't really even matter, right? Like you actually just go straight to attrition battle,
Hmm.
and I wanted to remove those kind of unimportant mid game cards in favor of those kind of late game attrition cards.
Yeah, most
So
decks here, like in this position, are absolutely panicking. Right, the Pirate Sives come through. You've got two dragons and a half shark staring you down. But with your deck, of course, you've got the B prep.
yeah, I'm not scared at all, right? Like I can go tit for tat against that deck.
Hmm.
And the other reason why Ink Crab here, and I think the commentators might have missed it, was that specifically at 11 Ink, you can play Goat and B Prep, right?
Hmm.
4+7, and that's 2 lore. So actually, if I don't have a bounce, I actually can just end the game at 18.
Wow.
So you see I'm at 17, right? So
Hmm.
basically, all I'm trying to do is, okay, how do I get to 18 lore? Because once I get to 18 lore, I win the game, right?
Hmm.
So I'm in like a spot where I put him in check. Like that's how I think of it. Like I'm putting him in check every single turn.
With a
Like
single Diablo that if he gets rid of, you draw. That's pretty good value.
yeah. So every turn I'm just like, okay, I put you in check, right? Eventually the deck, like the Ruby Sapphire deck, will run out of answers. They have a finite amount of answers,
Hmm.
but my deck has like an infinite amount of problems. So you can see every turn I'm just like, well, if you kill the rabbit, then I get like 2 cards, right? Kind of thing. And then I'm just like putting you in check every single turn. And like if I just deploy these multiple kind of things, imagine if this like this library was a genie, right? And then it gets B prep, then I'm
Yep.
not actually presenting anything, right? But because it's a library, it makes it so my opponent actually cannot deal with all the cards.
Yep.
So you see he's saying B
Shaking
prep,
his
and
head.
it's like, yeah, it's like, well, I can't deal with this library, so it's just gonna tick up, right? And like I get to 18, that's the magic number. So 11 ink 18 is the magic number of goat plus B prep, and that's like another reason why you don't cut B prep because it's kind of like a bounce in a way. So he was
Mm.
actually really lucky to get his one like copy of Hideaway here. But I'm just like, it's okay. I'm just gonna put you in check again. Here's like 2 more things you'll deal with. Good luck, right?
Yep.
So it's like every turn I'm just like putting a little bit of bait every turn, and eventually he runs out of stuff, right? And then that's how you kind of seal the game. So I think here, like he plays Pirate's Life, but it's just not enough, right? Because I can still gain 5 lore in one turn, right? With the Sisu for 2, Room for 1,
Yep.
Goat for 1, and B Prep for 1, right? That's 5. So 17 to 15, totally reasonable.
While we're
I still
watching
win.
this one play out, Ruby Amethyst was the third most represented deck in this tournament, and it was only you that made it through to the top 16. And of course, your list was
Mhm.
very different. Why do you think the other versions of Ruby Amethyst that were most likely playing Genies and Elsas, similar to the list that we saw you play in the Battle of the Bay, slightly more optimized, I think it's fair to say, because of course that was right at the start of the set. Why do you think those decks are struggling or struggled in this tournament?
Um, so some of my teammates did end up playing like Marshall and Charles. They ended up playing Ruby Amethyst,
Hmm.
and they ran like the traditional version. And what I heard a lot was that like, oh, I had a brick hand because it's like very awkward when you draw both genie and rabbit.
Right.
Like those hands are very, very awkward. And especially if you draw multiple, like it'll take a lot of turns to kind of unbrick yourself, right?
Hmm.
And if you're unbricking yourself, then you're not really answering your opponent's cards. And then those are kind of those like small windows that your opponent can like do their power plays. And like usually that's enough to kind of lose you the game. So I think besides that though, it's also like matchups, right? Like sometimes you run into like for example like the Amber Steel or like those Emerald Amethyst like aggro strategies, and Ruby Amethyst is just definitely not equipped to deal with those type of decks.
Hmm.
And if you just get unlucky with the matchmaking, you can also kind of lose that way.
Yeah, so this is, of course, the fourth game. If it was a best of three, you already would have won this one, but Scott, after clawing back into it, you are of course just one game away, and this is your opportunity to do it on the play. Are you feeling really, really confident? Is there anything that can go wrong for you here?
Mhm. So I'm feeling pretty good, and I think it was really funny because I remember I was talking to some people like that were watching Twitch chat, and they were like, "Oh man, Scott has like 10 ink, Ed has like 4 ink. Like, how's he gonna get out of this one?" And you know, this game actually reminds me specifically of the one I played against DK. Do you remember that one where he went like turn 3 grandma,
Where
turn
was
4
this?
another
Up in
grandma?
game?
How far ago? Oh, at Dallas.
Okay, I don't remember it.
Okay, so basically what he did was he went like turn 3 grandma and then turn 4 another grandma, how far I'll go.
Yeah.
Turn 5 2 more how far I'll goes,
Wow.
right? So his like just like crazy. So basically this is the same thing, right? He just went how far I'll go, shark, how far I'll go, and then just like have tons of ink, like just like go absolutely crazy, right? Um, but the thing is like eventually, yeah, you have like a ton of ink. It's like what are you gonna do with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing about shark, like it does tick up like quite a bit, right? It's actually quite scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like look how much like lore he gained from this shark. Like he's gonna gain it from this how far, from this visions, and then even like questing it or doing whatever with it. He gets a ton of lore from it, right? But the problem with that card is that it doesn't draw you any cards. So eventually it will get removed by the B prep or the Tremaine, and then you basically got 1 for 0'd, right? And it feels really bad. Look, he has another how far. So you look at this spot, it's like it literally has like 9 ink, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
have 4.
And
So it
you
looks
went
like absolutely
first.
crazy, right? And he went first, right? So this spot is like real bad for me, or seems like, right? I remember someone told me like Frank Carson was like, "Oh, Ed won this game for sure. Like, look how many cards he has in his hand."
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, like actually look how many
It's
cards I
like,
have. I like ton of cards,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, he went first in
Oh,
this one, my mistake, yes.
oh yeah, he went first in this one, right? So he even has even more advantage, right? But if you look at his hand, something I noticed was he really, really respected library. So he was really scared of library.
Right.
So you see, he has like 2 copies of Maui, like a hero to all in his hand. He's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get my 10 ink, then I'm gonna play these 2 Mauis and then crash this library, and it's gonna feel real good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that plan is like eventually when I do play that library, I will already get a card off of it. And if you play 2 Mauis, you can get like B prep and you kind of actually still lose in exchange, right? And you don't really feel good about it, right? Like you're literally holding these 2 dead cards, like 2 Maui like dead cards in your hand to just deal with one of my 10 cards in my hand, right? That probably will get value as well, right?
We also saw
So
Scott
I
like
think
have to play a T-po down here with this much ink to respect your Tremaine as well.
he has to, right? And then my answer to that is B prep, right? So I'm just gonna B prep, clean everything up anyway, and then you're still gonna have to be, scared of the future Tremaine, so you have to play more small stuff, and
Right.
then I'm gonna hit it with the Sisu, and then you play your one big guy eventually, and then you get hit with the Tremaine, and then you
Mm-hmm.
lose the game.
Did you ever
So
pull
it's
off
like
the Tremaine shift in your tournament run? Because of course it was something Moyne talked
uh,
about in the cast. You can shift Tremaine onto Tremaine and then bounce them both back with one
yeah.
limb.
So in this run, actually the whole tournament, I didn't get to shift Tremaine a single time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because people really respect that line, right? Like it's like, oh, if I leave this Tremaine up, I can get shift bounce,
I
and
would
I
not
actually
respect
just lose
that
the
line
game.
if I played against you, I have to say. But that's the level, right? You're at the North American Championships.
Yeah, it's like Hiram, like letting Hiram or Tamatoa survive for 1 turn. It's exactly the same thing. You don't
Mm-hmm.
respect it for 1 turn. Actually, you can just lose the game.
Yeah.
So here he respects like the Tremaine again, right? Like he's like, okay, I'm gonna start deploying these Mauis to the board and try to use it to like block. I don't know about that though, because like I thought his game plan was to try to use these Mauis to like clear out a library immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I think he kind of was like, oh, I need to start like deploying these kind of blockers. And I feel like the problem with that is like if you really look at his board, he's only really questing for 1, right?
Yes.
It's actually not that scary, even though there's like 2 characters on board. I'm like, okay, you're questing for 1, like who cares, right?
One thing we haven't
Um,
mentioned, Ed, is that Scott's, and of course it's open decklist, you know this, he doesn't have any copies of Lucky Dime. Do you think that changed how favoured
of
it was
course.
for you significantly?
Yeah, that's the first thing. I mean, I didn't look at his deck list beforehand. And then when I saw it, the first thing I look for is like how many dimes is he playing,
Okay.
right? And then when I saw he played 0, I was like, oh, basically he has no reach, right? His only reach is like, Pirate's Life or some kind of Maui Shark thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of try to play around that, right? I already noticed he played like a Pirate's Life earlier. So it's like way less likely for him to kind of have another one. So I'm a little bit more okay with him gaining some lore because I know he can't really get to the finish line that easily.
And obviously you don't know
Um,
all of the cards which have gone into Scott's Inkwell because of cards like How Far Ago and put them face down. But are you
mhm.
really trying to track every card that's gone down there and remember? Because that can't be easy to do. I think that's one skill that I really struggle with in Lorcana. Have you got any tips on how I could get better at that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you don't have to remember all the cards. You kind of just have to remember the cards that matter, right? So
Hmm.
for example, in this spot, the only card that matters is Pirate's Life. Literally only Pirate's Life. And I already played I saw he played one earlier, right? So it's like, okay, he only has one left. To my
Yep.
knowledge, right? That
Yep.
is
Yep.
potentially somewhere in his deck. So you should probably try to respect it. And like getting to 17 is still a little bit sketchy, right? Because he can have like Shark plus Pirates. So that's something you have to kind of think about, right? And I think actually one thing I wanted to kind of say was that Maui was kind of actually heads up now that you think about it because he was able to do like a Sisu, and he wasn't able to kind of deploy something else next to it in that same turn.
Right.
So that previous Maui was able to block the Tremaine. So yeah, really heads up by him. So in this spot, it made it a little bit more awkward, right? Like now I can't really deal with the Sisu, and I let him quest to 16. So it's getting like a little dicey, right? Just a little bit. But it's something
Just a
that you kind of have
touch.
to just a touch, yeah. But it's like it's something you kind of have to do when you play control decks, right? And I think what makes like a great control player is like, how do I let my opponent just get just close enough to not get to the end, right?
And the
So
fact
it's
they don't
kind of
have the
like
lucky dime is allowing you to play like this as well. Do you think you would be able to take the same approach if they did have a lucky dime? You just have to hope they don't find it, or is that just not realistic?
oh yeah, you definitely have to be way more aggressive in terms of clearing the characters if
Hmm.
they do have lucky dime, right? So because I knew he didn't, I can like kind of let him gain a little bit more lore and let myself get a little bit more cards. So basically here is the turn where I'm like, okay, I can basically B prep myself. So I think this is actually quite an interesting turn because
Yeah, I
it's
was
like
expecting you to be prep here when I was watching, but you
yeah,
end
so
up
I think
not.
everybody thought I was gonna B prep here. I think I only have one copy of B prep, and it's like quite important to keep that copy of B prep, especially once you play your locations.
Hmm.
So actually, the if you have locations and that's how you win the game, kind of need like the B preps, right? So I was kind of looking at this board, and it's like, okay, I actually have brawl, and I could just brawl the Sisu and then challenge or brawl the human Sisu,
Hmm.
and then challenge the empowered sibling with the fox. And then if I did that, I'll let him quest with grandma, and that's like the only lore he'll get for the rest of the game.
Yep.
So basically, I just have all the tools I need for the rest of the game. I can just um I can just play board control. And I think something else is that this grandma, after she quests 3, right? So I already thought like, okay, I could just use this Tremaine to challenge it and then just like wipe the other characters that he plays off the board. So that was kind of like my game plan, like going into it. Like if I B prep, then it's like kind of like, well, I kind of lose the board, and I don't really want to do that, and I kind of want to B prep post locations.
So what
So
you're
I
saying
go,
here, with because he's got one pirate's life left, you can let him get to 17, but as soon as he gets to 18, you might lose the game on the spot. And therefore, what you're trying to do is you're trying to use his law as almost a resource, right? Like you're letting him get there while you focus on drawing more cards, and then you just try and claw your way back into it from that point.
it's totally reasonable, right? If you think about it, like if his only outs are like, shark plus a pirate's life,
Hmm.
I'm kind of okay kind of letting him kind of get there because the time he gets there, I probably would win the game. So I'm kind of okay, like, okay, he needs to have those two specifically. And if he only has Pirate's Life, then it's not going to be enough.
Yep.
I think something interesting here, though, he actually has a one-turn window to potentially win the game with a Shark and this Vitalosphere that he has in his hand.
Right.
So what happens is like, yeah, you play Vitalosphere, and then the following turn you can just like play a Shark, challenge, get your Pirate's Life, play your Pirate's Life, win the game, right?
Okay.
So that's like specifically a 13 ink play. Reveal's able to kind of have the foresight to like think, okay, really how I win this game is I need 13 ink, I need to play a Shark, and that's it. I win the game, right? Because
Hmm.
he already has the Pirate's Life in his discard. So that was actually kind of going through my mind, like I can actually lose if let him do that for one turn. But it's kind of like a risk I have to take. I also forget to quest with this magic broom. I got kind of crucified on the internet for this one.
Happens to the
Hopefully I
best of
didn't
us.
lose.
Proof it happens to the best
Yeah,
of
yeah,
us.
yeah. The sequencing with library is like it's just like too complicated, right? It's like you ink, then you move it, and then it's like you have the quest, and then
Yeah.
you play the character, then you pop it, then you draw two cards. So it's like yeah, I messed that one up, and it's like totally on me. And if I lost by one, then it is what it is.
Hmm.
So here I was really happy. Like actually, like him be prepping me here, I don't really care because basically he's letting me do whatever I want to do. Right? He used up basically all his ink. He didn't have the shark. I was very happy. I'm never gonna exert a character ever again. I don't need to. Right?
I mean,
Like
this is a
I
game
can
where
just
Scott went first, but now we're like 10, 12 turns into it, but it's almost like a board reset, and it's almost like you get to go first again, right? Like you're developing your characters first, and this double library is so difficult for him to deal with. He'll have a third, and this is what I call the Ed special now.
And it's really funny because, like, yeah, like you said, right? Like, look how much ink he has, right? I think he has like 11 or something, and I have more ink than him. I think I have like 11 as well, or
Yeah.
11 or 12. So I basically caught up, right? After I saw this, I was oh, I already won the game because, like, I have this. Like I said earlier, like the B prep after the locations is so backbreaking, right? Because you can't even like banish the location, and I'm just like banishing all your stuff, right? Like the other power of this rabbit in the library, right? Draw 2 cards. It's so insane. Like
And all your
too
libraries
good.
stay.
Right?
And you have so much ink
And
spread.
I
It's
think
like he's the Sapphire player, right? He's got all the ramp, but because you've had so much card draw, you've just been able to ink consistently once per turn. You've actually ended up with more cards in hand and more ink.
so. This is exactly what happened to the DK match too. When I played against him, I played 3 location,
Yep.
did a goat bounce, and then my last couple of cards in my hand was just like goat bounce goat, right? So here I already saw that like okay, yeah, I basically like won the game. Even if it removes my snake here, I get to 17, go bounce go, GG. Like it ends basically the same way.
Yeah, you're like,
every
yep,
single time.
yep. You do your thing, mate. You're looking pretty happy. Like, yeah, boy, let's go. Well, big congratulations, Ed. Massive win. You've of
Thank
course
you.
qualified already. You'd qualified for Worlds, but I think after this weekend, and of course after your previous DLC win, you're going to definitely be a fan favorite and one of the favorites for that tournament. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. You got a ton of prizes as well, of course. You tried to grab the cue card, which you probably shouldn't have tried that, but you can't win them all.
I was like, "What are you doing?" But I realized she was pointing towards like all my like people that were kind of sitting in the front row, and I remember
Speaking
like
of
before I
which,
came up,
anyone you'd like to give a shout out to?
I'm here to give the shout out in there, but it's like
Yeah.
my team, like Team Tianhu, I think it's very hard to like do these things on your own, and it's very important, I would say, to kind of bounce your ideas off of like others,
Agree.
and especially if you trust them, right? Like being able to kind of share your ideas and see what works and what doesn't, I think is very important. So, special shout out to my team and also SLTC, another testing group. I think it's very important to kind of have, the great minds of the game that you can kind of talk to. And I'm very fortunate
There
to
it
be able to
is. Love to see that. So
bounce my ideas.
you got 2 golden Mickeys, right? It's not 3, it's 2. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, too.
Only
Zan has
2.
3 though.
One behind Zan somehow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, is there anywhere people can find more of your Disney Lorcana stuff if they want to watch more of you? Like, I want to watch more. Where can I watch? Where can I find more of your stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, I post a little bit on Twitter, now, with the win. It's kind of sweet. And on YouTube, I'll probably like have some YouTube videos, some kind of recap of the event. And yeah, you can find me at Ed Lorcana.
He'll be top pinned in the description. We actually played a game against each other, didn't we, about a month ago on Pixelborn Connect. I think that's been collecting dust, but I think I might post that. I seem to remember my Gantu got hit by Lady Tremaine. So I learned the hard way.
The early sighting.
What's that, sorry?
the early sightings of Lady Tremaine before it became like the mainstream thing, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Ed. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Really always enjoyed talking to you. Loved watching you. Loved the deck. Like, honestly, it was as soon as I saw the deck, I wanted you to win because I think it was really. I really love to see the outside the box thinking. I guess my final question before we end: do you think you won this tournament in the deck building process, and what I mean by that, of course, you played phenomenally, right? But do you think that you gained a big edge in the deck building process, and do you think that's a big part of Disney Lorcana, or do you think it's all about gameplay and the deck is not as important?
Oh. Okay, personally, in my opinion, I think it's actually the most important thing. Like, if I had to put like a percentage, I would say low-key, like the deck building part is probably like at least 60% of your success. And then maybe 40% like gameplay. Because it's kind of like you won't have the options to do the things you want to do if they're not in your deck, right? And I think the thing is like, I know there's like a lot of different philosophies where it's like, oh, I want to play one of this, so I have the option for that. there's definitely an opportunity cost, right? Like that card could have been something else, right?
Hmm.
Like if I played two Tremaine, two Medusa, like or one and like Dragonfire and all this kind of stuff, and it's like actually I just needed specifically Tremaine, and
Yep.
the only thing I really want to do this game is play my Tremaine. So why don't I just put more copies of Tremaine, right? And I know that like a lot of people are like, why are you playing like these 12 one drops, right? Why are you not playing 13, 10, 11, whatever, right? And it's because these 12 specifically synergize so well with library.
Hmm.
And the only thing I really want to be doing in the mid game is play library and then put a bunch of stuff in there. So why don't I just play four copies of that, right? Like I value kind of that redundancy a lot in this game because like the mulligan or like the altering phase is like very generous, right?
Yep.
You can basically have whatever hand you want to, and like whatever you line up with your opponent is what determines the game. And especially if you're able to, come with the same game plan. I'm on the play. I'm going for that one cost Flynn Sisu rabbit thing. I get to do that every game on the play. It's very, very hard to beat, right? And then when I'm on the draw, I want to do like, one drop into multiple one drops into a crab or Sisu rabbit, and then eventually get that mid game with library. And I realize library is just one of the best like kind of mid game engines
Hmm.
because sometimes I think one game that kind of showcased that was when I played against R&B. And on turn 4, I had a choice between playing a rabbit and a library. And I remember watching the LCQ. This is kind of where I took the idea from. So there was a guy, he played a mini mouse, like the one cost, the 1/3, right?
Hmm.
And then he went Flynn, Sisu, and then played library, and then put the library underneath the mini mouse, and then
Hmm.
quested with the mini mouse. So I was like, what if I just do that with like the draw one cards, right?
Yep.
Like if I have like, the Chernobog, or it's mostly turn 4 on with the Chernobog is just absolutely crazy, right?
Yes.
But let's say you don't have it and you're playing against, for example, like in Blurple specifically, the turn that you play that library, it can Elsa your Flynn, right? And get a free banish on it.
Hmm.
So I was thinking, okay, actually I'm just gonna play the library, put my Flynn in there, and then kind of, insulate against that play. Because if you want to challenge my Flynn, okay, that's fine. I get to draw a card. I'm
Hmm.
actually okay with that, right? And you still have to deal with the library, and you still have to deal with my Sisu. So I think library is just a more flexible draw card as opposed to Genie.
Hmm.
And I know it's not like a body, but in a way it kind of is, right? It still exerts a ton of kind of willpower on your opponent that takes quite a bit of resources to remove. And if they don't remove it early, and you can just keep attaching to it, challenging, drawing more cards, and it'll just kind of snowball from there.
I think it's perfect with the
So,
Tremaines and the Be Prepared as well, right? I think that's what really enables it. Like I said, I tested Library a lot ahead of
mhm,
Seattle, and my deck was quite quick, and it just wasn't working for me there. And as soon as I replaced
mhm.
it for Queen's Castle, I was like, yeah, okay, this is much better because the Queen's Castle with that one extra law fit the playstyle. And I think here you've just found the perfect card to enable this control style of Ruby Amethyst, really.
Yeah. So like yeah, like that game 3, right, where I was able to like to play the library and then protect it with the Tremaines, right?
Yep.
Because like no matter what you play, Tremaine will deal with it. Then I could touch the Tremaine. You remove my Tremaine, I draw a card, draw more protection for the library, or just put more libraries.
Yep.
Okay, so I think they kind of feed each other in that way, where it's like what they call like engine, right? Like having an engine in the game is very important
Hmm.
because once you get stuck, that's how you kind of brick, don't have the options, and then lose the game. So looking back at the deck, I think it's like very perfectly made for this kind of Ruby Sapphire meta. Just being able to kind of chain to yourself, not really brick, basically never brick, right? Like I think in that one game I was very kind of unfortunate drawing like multiple brawls,
Hmm.
no engine pieces, and of course that can happen, right? I'm not saying like there's no luck in the game. There's still like a ton of luck, even though there's a generous mulligan
It's a
system.
card game.
Sometimes,
There has to be.
yeah, like sometimes like you actually don't get the cards that you need, and that's why like a lot of people are advocating for like, oh, I want to play like best of 3 or best of 5, because like the luck aspect definitely will go down in those type of scenarios. But then how do you kind of counteract the play draw discrepancy, right? So personally, I'm still like going back to like the best of 2 or best of 3 kind of format. Like I think it totally makes sense for day one to be best of 2,
Yep.
just to mitigate that play draw discrepancy. It's just
Agree.
like too egregious. Like I think the LCQ winners is just like, if you're high rolling literally with your dice, then you're gonna probably win the tournament, right? Like you win
I
five dice
really
rolls.
hate now whenever I play best of threes, I honestly just don't enjoy it as much. I really love the 2 game format. I think and then the perfect fit for me is the 2 game format in Swiss, where you can then get the higher seeding and earn your right to go first in a best of 3. I personally think it's a really, really great addition to competitive. And I know it's not for everyone, but it's interesting to hear that you're a fan of it. I think on that as well, did you find that 7 rounds, because this is something I was talking to Frank Carsten about quite a lot in Paris, did you find like 7 rounds was enough for the Continentals? Do you think that it maybe could have been a few more rounds? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, I think for 128,
Yeah.
7 is perfectly reasonable. Like
Okay.
I think after that is probably too many rounds. Of course, you want to have like the real cream of the crop rise to the top,
Hmm.
but I think 7 rounds is basically where you want to be to. It's very apparent, I would say. Like I think only um Luke Wonderland kind of missed on the bubble with the score that he had,
Yep.
I think 304 or something like that, 313. But it's like I would say after 7 rounds for 128, I think that's actually the perfect amount, and it definitely should show like who brought the best deck, who played the best, who had some luck involved, right? Who had good matchups, and just being able to kind of play 7 rounds should be a good indicator of
Awesome.
who brought the best and who played the best that day.
Awesome. Well, I hope that this win can inspire some other people out there to try and be really creative in their decks. I think it really shows that I've always held the firm belief that in Disney Lorcana, you can gain the biggest edge in the deck builder. Of course, you're not going to get there without great play, but if your deck's not great, you can play perfectly and it's not really going to do you any favors. I think there's so much unexplored possibilities with Disney Lorcana. I think for me, the thing that really made me fall in love with this game is the deck building. I think it's so deep. There's so much you can do, and for me, I'm really really happy to see someone coming through with something really out of left field. Okay, it's Ruby Amethyst, but this is very very different and very unexpected, which is why as soon as I saw the deck, I loved it, and why I was so happy to see you win. So thanks again for coming on the channel, mate. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I've learned so much from you about deck building in Lorcana with the whole like uninkables and like inkable ratios and stuff, and absolutely love watching you play and there's definitely going to be a lot of people that are rooting for you to win the World Championships. And I think you might be the favourite after this weekend, I have to say. But it's don't want to put any pressure on you, but we're wishing you the best of luck.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, mate. We'll take care. And thanks everyone for watching. Give the video a like. Thanks again to Card Market for sponsoring. Cheers.
Bye.